Recently, I was talking to a close coworker friend of mine who was questioning their accolades and feeling behind their peers despite a recent promotion, positive feedback, and successful projects. During our conversation, I could quickly empathize with that feeling of imposter syndrome. I felt it for a good decade, from age 18 to my late 20s, in a couple different areas of my life. It dawned on me, though, that while we were talking, I realized that that feeling for me has been popping up less and less over the past year or so, despite not much changing about me on paper. After that chat, I started to dive deeper into imposter syndrome and examine what I had been doing to start quieting that pesky voice. Studies show that most people, especially women and people of color, experience imposter syndrome at some point in their life, whether it be school, work, or in their relationships. Specifically in your 20s and 30s, when we're already comparing ourselves with others and not quite rooted in who we are yet, imposter syndrome can creep in. In this chat, I'll go into what imposter syndrome is, the different types, and the tactics that I've used to start quieting that voice. My purpose today is not to cure all imposter syndrome. That's above my pay grade, but to remind you that you're not alone and share how I've started to overcome it. Before we get into it, a quick introduction. I'm Kimmy. I'm 30 years old, living in New York City, working in technology audit consulting, and welcome to On Our Way, a channel where we talk about navigating careers and life through the lens of being women. Without further ado, let's get on our way. Starting off with the definition of imposter syndrome. And as a note, the information I'm referencing is from Healthline and Very Well Mind, and I've linked key articles in the description. Imposter syndrome involves feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence that persist despite your education, experience, and accomplishments. It usually manifests in you believing or fearing that you don't deserve your success or to be in a certain job, field, and so on. Experts define this as a conflict between self-perception and how other people perceive you. Typically, those that experience imposter syndrome are what society would deem as successful. For instance, C-suite executives, founders of successful businesses, esteemed athletes, and so on. People with imposter syndrome usually try to compensate by putting in more work. But it's important to recognize that with imposter syndrome, your further accomplishments don't reassure you long term. Therefore, this isn't a problem that goes away once you get the next promotion or get that positive feedback. Imposter syndrome often pops up during times of transition. So maybe it's starting a new school, new job, new position, or in new relationships. Imposter syndrome is not listed in the DSM-5, which is the standard for diagnosing mental health conditions. That being said, the symptoms present are also in other disorders, for instance, anxiety or depression. Experts say that with imposter syndrome, you may actually self-sabotage by procrastinating because you're anxious about the outcome. Serena Williams, Natalie Portman, Emma Chamberlain, Emma Watson, Tina Fey, and even our very own Michelle Obama, objectively very successful women, have spoken publicly about experiencing imposter syndrome. This drills home that no amount of outward success really cures this feeling. And hopefully hearing those names is a reminder that it is a feeling and not a fact. In my research, I learned that there are 5 different types of imposter syndrome, which I didn't know before, so let's get into it. First off, the perfectionist. The perfectionist involves believing that you could have done better if you don't do something perfectly. These folks aim for perfection, and since perfection is not achievable, we're only human, they are left feeling like failures. They are often driven by the guiding light of being the absolute best. Number 2 is the natural genius. In this type, you feel like a fraud if you fail to succeed on the first try or if something doesn't come easily to you. You believe that successful people have things come easily to them. So when they don't, they often feel like failures. Number 3, the soloist. Soloists feel like if they can't get there on their own and have to ask for questions along the way, again, they're frauds. These individuals feel like asking questions would expose their inadequacies. Number 4, the expert. Experts feel that they need to know everything there is to know about a specific topic or master every step in a process. And number 5, the superhero. The superhero involves believing that you should be the hardest worker and results in pushing yourself to the limit while also believing that this should be easier for you and you should be able to do even more. These folks tend to over-prepare for tasks. Across these 5, it's possible for someone to experience the different types. For instance, you may feel soloist imposter syndrome at work, however, the perfectionist when it comes to your personal relationships. Now, I have to call out that having imposter syndrome doesn't come up out of nowhere. Roots can often be traced back to our childhood environments, what we've been praised for, workplace structure, and the overall comparisons and heavy critique we're often inundated with in society. In interviews, you often hear interviewers asking women how they deal with imposter syndrome, kind of putting it out into the universe that they must have it. They must feel undeserving of their success in some way. Alona Mar, American Olympic rugby player and media personality, recently went viral when an interviewer asked her this exact question. She responded saying, I don't have that. When the interviewer pressed, how is that possible? Alona explained, I think I deserve what I got. I think I worked very hard, which let's just take a second. Long term, we need to fix the system and the messaging towards people, especially women. Again, above my pay grade. But in the meantime, I hope defining imposter syndrome gives us the tools to recognize it when it starts to creep up. Naming a fear demystifies it and takes some of that power away. Once you acknowledge the feeling, you can start to look out for those warning signs. When I was digging deeper after that conversation with my coworker, I tried to be self-critical in how I've experienced imposter syndrome in my life so far. At first, all I could think about was in my career, but once I started peeling that onion, I realized that it goes back even farther. So let's rewind, shall we? My all-girls, 35-person per grade high school required one semester of computer science. Mind you, I started high school in 2009, so this was still cutting edge. Freshman year, I took the Intro to Basic class, which is literally a programming language called Basic. It totally clicked, and I was naturally pretty good at it. I took all the computer science classes that my high school had to offer, including AP Computer Science, and senior year was in our highest level iPad programming class with a whopping 3 other students. All of us went on to study computer science in college, 2 of which did it at Stanford. Coding came pretty easy to me. I didn't really have to study much, and I was praised for being naturally good at it. Now, cue college. I went in feeling very confident about my computer science concentration, but was quickly brought down to reality. All of a sudden, I was in a class 80% of which was male, already very different than my all-girls high school, and got a B- on my first exam, which was very sobering. Very quickly, I started to feel imposter syndrome creep in, and now that I know the different types, I can recognize that it was specifically the natural genius. I'd been praised all of high school for naturally just getting programming, and praised specifically for not having to work very hard at it. When I was faced with college-level computer science classes, I had to really apply myself and felt like a fraud because all of a sudden it wasn't coming easy to me anymore. And the very thing I was praised for, that effortlessness, was no longer accurate. It felt like college-level computer science came easy to everyone but me. Looking back, I realized that those classmates that I felt that way about slept, ate, and breathed coding. They did hackathons on weekends, lived in the lab, all the things. They were successful because it was their passion. Maybe they were naturally good at it, but it was them working hard that got them that post-grad Google software engineering job. At first, the imposter syndrome was crippling and felt like a real identity crisis for me. I felt like I wasn't smart because I had to work hard in these classes to succeed. All of a sudden, my thing for the last 4 years felt like a lie. Hindsight, I can recognize that being good compared to the 200 people in my high school is a lot more achievable than in a school of 10,000. When I was 18 to 21 going through this identity crisis, I wish I had the verbiage to put to what I was feeling to understand it was normal and doesn't make me any less smart to have to study. That said, I didn't have a frontal lobe yet, so you can only expect so much. Through being in that environment and having to work a lot harder to succeed in my computer science classes, I realized that it wasn't something I was super passionate about. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something I wanted to pour myself into the way I would have had to. Luckily, I found in college I was interested in technology, yes, but more so how technology can propel a business forward. So less of the nitty-gritty programming, but more so the marrying of business and technology. That's how I landed in my current field, where we help businesses build internal controls over their technology to ensure their financial data is complete and accurate. For those corporate girlies, I'm referencing Sarbanes-Oxley, commonly known as SOX. This can be as simple as making sure they have strong passwords in place, the right people have access to the right data, to more complex controls, ensuring that the right data is interfaced between systems and monitored appropriately. A lot of mumbo jumbo, but a great pivot into where I experienced crippling imposter syndrome yet again. You guessed it. at work. Funny enough, it didn't start appearing until maybe around age 25 when I started to get promoted early, being put up for bigger clients, having less oversight, and managing more people. All things that are objectively signs of you succeeding in the corporate world. I felt like a fraud because all of a sudden I was at the same level and in same conversations with people that had anywhere from 3 to 10 more years of experience than I did, which when you only have been in the workplace for 4 years, it feels like a lot. Given my lower number of years of experience, I also didn't have any certifications. In my specific field, the most relevant one is the CISA, or Certified Information Systems Auditor, which is basically like the information systems or technology version of a CPA, which is what accountants get. I was constantly nervous that people were going to find out that I have way less years of experience than others and I don't have my CISA. To combat this, I put it into overdrive and took on any opportunity that was thrown at me, even if it meant working late and totally burning out. I was praised by management for my high utilization, which in consulting speak is the percentage of time that you're billable to a client. So for instance, if you bill 40 hours a week to a client, you're 100% utilized. Billable hours exclude any admin or outside of client work, like bidding for new projects or invoicing and so on. Typically, if you're billable 40 hours a week at the management levels, that means you're working 50 plus because you can't bill business development or admin time. Obviously, your company wants your utilization to be higher because they make more money off of you. You're still getting the same salary, but they're billing you out more, therefore they're gaining more of a profit. As a first-year manager, my utilization got to 145%. I was crying all the time because I was so stressed. I wasn't asking for help. I was a mess. Despite working crazy hours, I would still procrastinate the really tough work because deep down I didn't want to be proven right, that I was an imposter and shouldn't be at those levels if I didn't know how to handle something. I was being told at other coworkers at my levels, like, I don't know how you do it all. And my first thought was always, well, I have to, because if I don't, you guys will realize that I don't have as many years of experience as you, and I don't have all the proper certifications to even be here. During this time, I crammed for my CISA and luckily just passed. I still felt like I was going to be found out at any second, despite now having my CISA, being promoted, and holding my own in higher level meetings. Now I can recognize that I was feeling that superhero imposter syndrome, where I felt like I had to be the hardest worker to prove myself. But spoiler, as you know with imposter syndrome, no amount of external praise, promotions, or success will fix that feeling. Enough about me struggling through school and my career for 10 years. Let's turn this around. After that conversation with my coworker and realizing that imposter syndrome hasn't been creeping up for me recently, I was dissecting what I've changed. And it's not external validations through getting promoted or getting certifications. First step was objectively recognizing my success. The way I would do this, which sounds kind of silly, is I would tell myself the facts without using the words me or I. For instance, this person has been promoted multiple times. She continues to receive positive feedback from management and clients, and she's successfully trained members of the team, and now they're getting promoted and having success of their own. When I objectively state the facts, it takes the feeling out of it, and for me at least, puts things into perspective. If someone told me that, I'd be like, wow, she's crushed it. Versus when it's I got promoted or I do XYZ, I'm way more critical. Next was changing my definition of success. Changing my definition of success to not be external has also helped. For instance, not solely focusing on being promoted to a higher title, but learning and being able to apply that knowledge. This has in turn allowed me to tackle challenges head on rather than avoid them because I'd be proving that I was a fraud. If success is learning and executing on what you've learned, you're no longer the soloist afraid to ask questions. You are driven by questions and figuring out new puzzles, which of course in turn propels your career. As the years go by, I'm also banking time. Now being 30, I've had more years of proving to myself that I'm capable and can get the job done. At age 25, I simply had 5 less years of a track record for myself in pressure cooker moments. Lastly, has been zooming out from the task at hand and putting it all into perspective, which is easier said than done and definitely gets easier with time. Life is so much more than your job or school or whatever it is that you're feeling imposter syndrome about. I try not to diminish it when I remind myself of that. All of those things are important, but none of them is everything. At the end of the day, I graduated college with a concentration in computer science, found a field that I was actually interested in, and the world still turned. I wasn't paraded around campus in a dunce cap for having to study. One of my main clients when I was 25 that brought me a lot of stress was acquired. We wrapped up the project successfully, and I felt more confident tackling tough client dynamics in the future having that experience. And eventually, way down the line, I'll retire, and I'm sure be grateful for all the learning I was able to do in my career. All these stressful things will end, which is hard to remember in the moment. What sticks with me is what I learned along the way and how I felt about myself during that time. I'm trying to give myself compassion, just doing my best and getting through and not worry about always having to prove myself or do everything perfectly. Getting through life is a lot easier when you're your own best friend, so be kind to yourself. Well, I've noticed that over the past year or so that imposter syndrome voice has been getting quieter. It may come back as I go through transitions in my career as well as just in life. But now I feel at least a little bit more confident in tackling it. As we're on our way through our careers and life, we can take back the power of imposter syndrome. Once we name the feeling, we demystify it. If we can recognize how imposter syndrome feels to us, we can look out for warning signs of it rearing its ugly head. For me, it's when I start to feel like I have to work crazy hours to prove myself to a new team despite my title, while also still procrastinating the tough stuff and feeling afraid to ask questions. Take some stock that if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, it is most likely because you've experienced some kind of success. If this was helpful in any way, shape, or form, please give this video a like. I'd love to hear in the comments your experience with imposter syndrome and any helpful tips you may have. And lastly, please subscribe for similar videos as we all continue on our way.